Hey guys, it's Tom from Alan's BMX. Welcome to our video. We're talking here about going from a one-piece crank into a three-piece crank. In this video, we're going to be fitting the Redline Flight cranks, which is a three-piece crank using the 19mm spindle. These are the twin pinch current production models. We've just got these in on alansbmx.com, so go over and check them out over there. But we're going to go through the process of part selection. Yes, you're going to need some different parts if you're going from a one-piece crank, like on this Haro here, and you're upgrading to a three-piece. So we'll go through start to finish, show you everything that you're going to need, and also show you how to install them. So you've picked up your brand new Flight crank, which is available on alansbmx.com, and it's arrived in the post, but you're missing some more parts. When you change from a one-piece crank like this one here, you're going to need a couple of things. So the first thing you're going to need is a bottom bracket. So the old style bottom bracket that's used with these one-piece cranks, the loose ball ones, are not going to be compatible with the 19mm spindle that are on our Redline Flight cranks. So we have, for example, here our American 19mm sealed bearing bottom bracket. This one's from Tribal, comes in a range of different colors, but we've picked silver for this build that we're doing on the Haro behind me. So this kit is going to include a couple of aluminium cups to adapt the mid-size bottom bracket sealed bearings, which is commonly used on the modern bikes, to fit in our 51mm cup size. That's the hole size that's in the bottom of our frame where the cranks go through. It's 51mm, which is USA, or also known as American. The kit's going to include a few things. Again, you've got both the bearings, you've got your center spacer, which is necessary to put in between. This is because as you tighten the cranks on, it's going to squish everything together, so you don't want the bearings to crush, so you're going to need that center spacer. You've got a selection of other outer spacers so that you can space the crank out so it doesn't hit the frame on the back end or anything like that. You've also got a couple of dust covers as well, including this kit. So you're going to need one of those American sealed bearing bottom brackets. The next thing you're going to need when you switch from the one-piece crank is you're also going to need what's called a top hat adapter washer. Now, when you get your Spider or Power Disc, in our case here, which is one of the Neptune ones we have available on alansbmx.com, the center hole here is going to be around 23.8mm, and that is the size that fits directly on to your one-piece crank here on this side, as the one-piece crank has two different sizes of thread on it. Now that we're switching to the 19mm, you're going to need to adapt that. So you'll need to pick up one of these top hat washers to the correct size of the spindle on your crank, which is 19mm, and that just fits straight into the side of the Spider or Power Disc, again in our case, to adapt it to the correct size. The last thing you're going to need to think about as well when you're switching from a one-piece to a three-piece crank setup is your pedals. Unfortunately, the pedals that you have already on your one-piece crank setup will not fit a three-piece crank. This is because the one-piece cranks use a 1/2" pedal thread, so it is a little bit smaller than the more commonly used 9/16 size, which is what's seen on all your modern BMX bikes and your modern mountain bikes and modern road bikes. It's the new standard. So you will need to pick up a fresh set of pedals. What we're doing here is we actually have the MKS BM7 pedals available in both 1/2" and 9/16. So we're not going to be changing the visual look of the bike for the pedals. In this case, we're just going to be switching it to the correct axle size. Again, those are all available on alansbmx.com. You can get a wide range of pedals now that you're switching into the three-piece crank because you're on that more common 9/16. So you can get stuff like the Haro Fusion pedal that we sell, the Fusion DX pedal over on the site, as well as like any modern bike pedal. So huge range of colors and options and styles available there. So now that we've gone through what you're going to need to do the conversion and we've got all of our parts laid out, let's get on to installing it on the Haro behind us and upgrade to a three-piece crank. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the rear wheel from our bike. It makes it a lot easier to work on the bike in the stand, but our ultimate goal here is to remove the chain from the chain wheel here. This will allow us to remove the crank. Next step is to remove the pedals. Most of the time it is a 15mm spanner. However, some pedals may use an Allen key as well on the inside on the spindle. The easy way to remove pedals is to pedal forwards and hold the spanner still to remove them, and it's the opposite when you are installing them. You can pedal backwards. To remove the crank from the bike, we're going to grab our spanner and remove this lock nut here. It is a reverse thread on this one. All of the one-piece cranks use a reverse thread on these nuts, so everything here will be a reverse thread. We're going to pop off the little washer here as well, and then grab our special tool, which is like a Y-shaped tool, to hook to these grooves and remove this, which is also reverse threaded. You can use a flat-headed screwdriver. This is not tight. This is actually your adjustment for the bearings on the original one-piece setup. So we're going to whiz that off here, and then we will be able to slide out the crank arm. So you pop out one side of the bearings, and then with your other hand, grab the bearing on the other side, and you can pop that out as well, and then the whole crank will slide through the center of the frame, relieving it from the bike. You'll be left with your original unsealed cups in the frame, so we're going to knock those out with a drift and a hammer. This is the easiest way to pop them out. Just be careful you don't damage anything while you're doing it. Make sure you do grease up your bottom bracket shell. We're already greased up as this was a new build anyway that we are upgrading, but always make sure you add more grease. We always suggest installing the bottom bracket using a proper bearing press like this one here. However, you can use a block of wood and a hammer if you want to do it a bit of an old school style, but we do suggest using the press like we do here in the shop. Once you put one bearing in, we're going to put the center spacer in. This is very important. You don't want to be crushing your bearings when you're tightening up your brand new 3-piece cranks and bottom bracket. So make sure that center spacer makes it in there, and then pop the other bearing in. We recommend pressing the bearings in one at a time. Even if you do have a press, this ensures that they get installed flat and get pushed in nicely and don't cause any damage to your frame. Quick cleanup while we're here, and we're going to grease up the spindle. It's always good to use much more grease than you expect. You can always wipe it off later, but we don't want any parts seizing up when we go to take this off later on when you're going to upgrade anything. Pop off the lock ring on the one-piece cranks, and you can pull off your spider chainring combo, or in our case the power disc combination, or you may just have a full solid one-piece sprocket as well. So we'll pop that off there. And now we're installing the top hat washer. We're going to line everything up onto the new crank arm. The flight cranks only have a right-hand drive crank arm, so we're going to pop the bolt in loosely for now, and our top hat assembly. Popping on the dust covers for the bottom bracket. You may have slightly different dust covers depending on the bottom bracket you're using. And we're also installing one center spacer here. So the main faff that you're going to have installing a 3-piece crank is getting your Q factor, it's called, set up, which is the distance between the two crank arms. You can see Adam here is using his finger as a guideline to see how much space is going to be required between the frame and the crank arm. We do suggest at least a finger width. That means that you're not going to be damaging anything. If something does accidentally come loose, you're not going to be ramming it straight into the chainstays on the frame and damaging it. You may have to play around with this a few times, putting the cranks on and off to make sure you're getting the correct spacing. It's a little bit finicky, but it does mean that you have quite a lot of adjustment in how wide it is. And we're popping the spacer on the other side to match it up, make sure it's nice and even. The other thing you want to make sure is that the spindle is recessed slightly inside of the crank arm itself, like this. You want to make sure that the bolts from each side can sandwich in and compress the system. If it is poking out past the flat part and you notice you're tightening up the cranks and it's still wobbly, then add equal amount of spacers to each side of the bottom bracket and the spindle to make sure it's all good to go. Going to be tightening up your sprocket bolt there and tightening up all the other bolts on the crank, which is the 2 pinch bolts on each side as well on the flight crank shown here. Some 48 spline cranks may not have this as an option. They don't have pinch bolts, but you just tighten on the crank arm. And finally, put everything back together, pop the chain on, pop the back wheel back into the bike, make sure it's all lined up and tightened down, and you're basically done. We're going to pop these pedals on. Again, always make sure you grease the pedals. And the top tip here is you can just pedal backwards whilst holding the spindle still, and it will tighten on by hand, and then give them a nip up with a 15mm spanner. You're good to go. And wow, doesn't that look so much better with the 3-piece crank? Not to mention functionally better as well. I mean, the 3-piece cranks are significantly stronger, less likely to bend than the little flimsy cast 1-piece cranks, even the newer ones, but particularly the ones from back in the day. So yeah, really cool upgrade, really adds a lot to the bike. 3-piece flight cranks from Redline, available over on allensbmx.com. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments box below. Check out our website, allensbmx.com, for loads of cool things, including this bike, which is actually for sale over on the site. One of the Haro Mike Dominguez USA made frame sets that they only made like 300 of. We've been building them into custom bikes like this one here, and this one just got even better with the flight crank 3-piece upgrade. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.